If there's one wrestler these days that is almost universally loved, it's LA Knight, and it's not hard to see why. The guy is a charisma machine. He can go in the ring, and he's believable in everything he does. But how did he get here? And perhaps more importantly, where is he headed next? This is why LA Knight is WWE's next big superstar. Believe it or not, this is Knight's third run in the WWE. Before becoming the household name he is today, Knight used to be an enhancement talent for the WWE. He made sporadic appearances teaming up with another fellow jobber, Jon Moxley, you might have heard of him, in a losing effort against The Big Show in a dark handicap match in May 2006. After doing this for a couple of years, Knight would finally land a developmental contract with the WWE in 2013, though he was still years away from getting his big break. You see, while the signs were there, WWE chose to ignore them and kept Knight in Jobberland, and he'd mostly be used to put over bigger talents, such as Mojo Rawley and Mason Ryan. Yeah, wonder how that went. Anyways, Knight, or Slate Randall as he was called back then, was released from his WWE contract in August of 2014. However, this ended up being a blessing in disguise, as Knight would spend the next 5 years learning the skills that would eventually make him one of the most popular guys in the business. Like many folks in his shoes at the time, Knight decided to take his talents over to Impact Wrestling and started performing under the name Eli Drake. And let me tell you, those 4 years with Impact didn't just mark his presence. They practically put him on the map. Even from his early days, you could see that he had the makings of a big-time star. Every time he opened his mouth, people listened. In fact, he made such a splash that Impact gave him his own talk show, Fact of Life. This gave him an even bigger spotlight, and he ended up winning the Impact World Championship, the Impact World Tag Team Championship, and TNA King of the Mountain Championship before eventually parting ways with the company in 2019. There was buzz back then that he might sign with the newly established All Elite Wrestling, since WWE doesn't really have the best track record when it comes to booking stars that made a name for themselves somewhere else. But still, he decided to take the chance and signed with WWE in 2021. Knight made his debut at NXT TakeOver Vengeance Day as a heel and made it clear that he had his sights set on the NXT North American Championship. You see, NXT midcard was buzzing at the time, with hungry contenders like Bronson Reed, Santos Escobar, and Isaiah Swerve Scott all eyeing that North American Championship. It was the golden ticket to the main roster. They all went to war at NXT TakeOver Stand and Deliver in a 6-man gauntlet match, but Knight failed to defeat eventual winner Bronson Reed. And sure, losing might seem like a downer, but it marked a turning point for Knight. That spotlight didn't just showcase his wrestling skills, it helped him find his footing in the WWE. Knight later aligned himself with Ted DiBiase, who was feuding with Cameron Grimes over who was the richest man in NXT. This led to a match between Knight and Grimes at TakeOver in Your House, where he managed to beat Grimes in a ladder match, earning himself the newly reintroduced $1 Million Championship. However, alliances in wrestling are often temporary, and Knight's association with DiBiase took a dramatic shift during the championship ceremony. Knight turned on DiBiase by attacking him. Knight faced off against Grimes once again at the Great American Bash, with the stipulation that if he lost to Grimes, he'd have to become Knight's personal butler. Knight walked away victorious that night, but the story continued to unfold on the August 10th episode of NXT. Knight agreed to defend his $1 Million Championship against Grimes at NXT TakeOver 36 under a unique condition. If he won, DiBiase would replace Grimes as Knight's butler. Luckily for DiBiase, Knight lost the title to Grimes, marking the end of his reign after a 70-day run. After this, Knight tried to capture the vacant NXT Championship on a few different occasions, but failed and instead entered into a brief feud with Gunther, but ended up on the losing side once again. This would be Knight's final storyline on NXT, as after spending a little less than a year in developmental, he'd be promoted to the main roster. Now, ever since Knight re-signed with the WWE in 2021, his age has been a bit of a sticky point. Knight was 39 when he made his main roster debut, and that got some folks at WWE a bit anxious. The higher-ups weren't ready to get big on a guy pushing 40, so they shuffled him into a comedy tag team with Massey and Mansoor as their slick agent character named Max Dupree. However, Knight's involvement actually seemed to give the Maximum male models a bit of a boost, and they even brought in Knight's sister, Maxine Dupree, to add some flair. The only hitch was, there wasn't really a clear plan in place for them. Then came a twist. Triple H took over WWE's creative direction after Vince was forced to retire and Dupree switched back to his LA Knight persona. No shade to the male models though, they sure brought the entertainment and made the most of what they were given. But it didn't exactly feel like the main event material, and the whole deal was more of a setback for LA Knight than anyone else in the faction. The real game changer for Knight came in the form of a showdown with Bray Wyatt towards the end of 2022. Now, this was a rivalry that immediately caught fire. Bray had just returned a couple of months earlier, and fans were going nuts over every cryptic breadcrumb he dropped online. People were super excited about his new character, and the eerie aura he brought both in and out of the ring. But then WWE pulled a WWE and derailed the whole feud by putting Knight and Wyatt into a match that was basically a 10-minute advertisement for Mountain Dew. Despite the storyline's negative reception, this rivalry with Bray turned out to be a hidden boom for LA Knight. This high-profile storyline allowed him to establish himself further on SmackDown. Not only did it showcase his skills to those who might have missed his NXT days, but it was also a glimpse of what he could bring to the table. Despite some folks not fondly looking back at this chapter, there were moments of sheer brilliance from LA Knight. In a peculiar way, he carried the rivalry with his incredible charisma and top-notch performances. The interesting part? Despite losing match after match for months as a heel, LA Knight's popularity on SmackDown began to soar. His natural charisma and mic skills worked like a charm, as more and more fans rallied behind him week after week. As the Money in the Bank pay-per-view drew near, a captivating dynamic emerged. Fans were firmly in Knight's corner, believing he might snatch the Money in the Bank briefcase. However, even though he played a pivotal role in the final moments, it was Damian Priest who ultimately emerged as the winner. Fans swore this was WWE trying to bury Knight. It was the higher-ups' way of telling people that they push who they want to push, not who the fans want to. But if you ask me, not winning the briefcase is the best thing that could have happened tonight. Winning the Money in the Bank contract has actually hampered superstars' push rather than help it. Damian Sandow, Otis, Austin Theory, Baron Corbin, Braun Strowman, all these guys suffered greatly after winning the briefcase, entering into pointless feuds and eventually cashing in underwhelming fashion or losing the contract before they even got the chance to do so. But now it's time for the big question. Why is LA Knight WWE's next big star? The answer is simple. He's a great personality reminiscent of larger-than-life characters like The Rock and Steve Austin. Plus, he's a self-made man, carving his path without relying on the corporate machinery. Despite facing a string of defeats in both NXT and the main roster, his popularity has risen wherever he's stepped foot. Many fans say he feels like an Attitude-era star transported to the present WWE landscape. Sure, he might be a bit older at 40, but look at someone like AJ Styles, who's still putting on a show at 46. So, Knight's got some solid years ahead before he hangs up his boots. In that time frame, who knows what exciting stuff we might see from him?